A civilization or civilization is any complex society characterized by urban development, social stratification imposed by a cultural elite, symbolic systems of communication, and a perceived separation from and domination over the natural environment. Civilizations are intimately associated with and often further defined by other socio-politico-economic characteristics, including centralization, the domestication of both humans and other organisms, specialization of labor, culturally ingrained ideologies of progress and supremacism, monumental architecture, taxation, societal dependence upon farming and expansionism. Historically, civilization has often been understood as a larger and more advanced culture, in contrast to smaller, supposedly primitive cultures. Similarly, some scholars have described civilization as being necessarily multicultural. In this broad sense, a civilization contrasts with non-centralized tribal societies, including the cultures of nomadic pastoralists, Neolithic societies or hunter-gatherers, but it also contrasts with the cultures found within civilizations themselves. As an uncountable noun, civilization also refers to the process of a society developing into a centralized, urbanized, stratified structure. Civilizations are organized in densely populated settlements divided into hierarchical social classes with a ruling elite and subordinate urban and rural populations, which engage in intensive agriculture, mining, small-scale manufacture and trade. Civilization concentrates power, extending human control over the rest of nature, including over other human beings. Civilization, as its etymology suggests, is a concept originally linked to towns and cities. The earliest emergence of civilizations is generally associated with the final stages of the Neolithic Revolution, culminating in the relatively rapid process of urban revolution and state formation, a political development associated with the appearance of a governing elite. Contents. History of the concept. The English word civilization comes from the 16th century French civiliser, from Latin civilis, related to civis and civitas. The fundamental treatise is Norbert Elias's The Civilizing Process, which traces social mores from medieval courtly society to the early modern period. In The Philosophy of Civilization, Albert Schweitzer outlines two opinions, one purely material and the other material and ethical. He said that the world crisis was from humanity losing the ethical idea of civilization, the sum total of all progress made by man in every sphere of action and from every point of view insofar as the progress helps towards the spiritual perfecting of individuals as the progress of all progress. Adjectives like civility developed in the mid-negative 16th century. The abstract noun civilization, meaning civilized condition, came in the 1760s, again from French. The first known use in French is in 1757, by Victor de Riquidi, Marquis de Mirabeau, and the first use in English is attributed to Adam Ferguson, who in his 1767 essay on the history of civil society wrote, "Not only the individual advances from infancy to manhood, but the species itself from rudeness to civilization. The word was therefore opposed to barbarism or rudeness, in the active pursuit of progress characteristic of the Age of Enlightenment." In the late 1700s and early 1800s, during the French Revolution, civilization was used in the singular, never in the plural, and meant the progress of humanity as a whole. This is still the case in French. The use of civilizations as a countable noun was in occasional use in the 19th century, but has become much more common in the later 20th century, sometimes just meaning culture. Only in this generalized sense does it become possible to speak of a medieval civilization, which in Elias's sense would have been an oxymoron. Already in the 18th century, civilization was not always seen as an improvement. One historically important distinction between culture and civilization is from the writings of Rousseau, particularly his work about education. Emile, here, civilization, being more rational and socially driven, is not fully in accord with human nature, and human wholeness is achievable only through the recovery of or approximation to an original prediscursive or pre-rational natural unity. From this, a new approach was developed, especially in Germany, first by Johann Gottfried Herder, and later by philosophers such as Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. This sees cultures as natural organisms, not defined by conscious, rational, deliberative acts, but a kind of pre-rational folk spirit. Civilization, in contrast, though more rational and more successful in material progress, is unnatural and leads to vices of social life such as guile, hypocrisy, envy and avarice. In World War II, Leo Strauss, having fled Germany, argued in New York that this opinion of civilization was behind Nazism and German militarism and nihilism. Characteristics. Social scientists such as V. Gordon Childe have named a number of traits that distinguish a civilization from other kinds of society. Civilizations have been distinguished by their means of subsistence, types of livelihood, settlement patterns, forms of government, social stratification, economic systems, literacy and other cultural traits. Andrew Nikiforuk argues that civilizations relied on shackled human muscle. It took the energy of slaves to plant crops, clothe emperors, and build cities, and considers slavery to be a common feature of pre-modern civilizations. All civilizations have depended on agriculture for subsistence, with the possible exception of some early civilizations in Peru which may have depended upon maritime resources. Grain farms can result in accumulated storage and a surplus of food, particularly when people use intensive agricultural techniques such as artificial fertilization, irrigation and crop rotation. It is possible but more difficult to accumulate horticultural production, and so civilizations based on horticultural gardening have been very rare. Grain surpluses have been especially important because grain can be stored for a long time. A surplus of food permits some people to do things besides produce food for a living. Early civilizations included soldiers, artisans, priests and priestesses, and other people with specialized careers. A surplus of food results in a division of labor and a more diverse range of human activity, a defining trait of civilizations. However, in some places hunter-gatherers have had access to food surpluses, such as among some of the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest and perhaps during the Mesolithic Natufian culture. It is possible that food surpluses and relatively large-scale social organization and division of labor predates plant and animal domestication. Civilizations have distinctly different settlement patterns from other societies. The word civilization is sometimes simply defined as living in cities. Non-farmers tend to gather in cities to work and to trade.